by a bent line, by a straight line, by a crooked line. The Crooked Path, a podcast for modern cunning folk with Peter Pagan. Hello and welcome to The Crooked Path. My name is Peter Pagan, and this week we're going to be taking a look at leadership. But first, let's have a little bit of news. Not a lot of news this week. I just wanted to mention that this coming Saturday we are going to be at Pagan Pride in San Diego, down in sunny San Diego. Not only myself and Linda, we will be there vending with Pendrake Publishing and Black Hen Pots and Curios. So we'll be selling books and glassware and pottery and a few other bits and pieces as well. But we will also be in the company of the lovely Raven. Raven's Flight is going to be down there as well vending, so you can get wonderful, wonderful incenses. And Tony Mierzwicki, author of Greco-Egyptian Magic, is going to be there on the author table, and I'm sure lots of other people are as well. But there's going to be an interesting contingent of nut bars, including myself, down there. So if you happen to be in or near San Diego, come to Pagan Pride. It's at Balboa Park, and it should be a lot of fun. And I'll be teaching a workshop, a visceral magic workshop, there as well. The doors have closed for applications for our training coven. Pleased to say that we have sent out our acceptance letters to the lucky or not so lucky depending on your perspective, applicants, and we'll be starting up classes on the 1st of October. So if you're waiting, if you haven't heard, drop me a line, because I've sent out emails to everybody, so you should have heard a yay or nay by now, and if you haven't, it got lost in the ether. So fire off another email and I will respond nicely, because I'm like that, I'm kind. That's really it for the news this week, so let's jump straight into lore. The subject of leadership is an interesting one when it comes to, because you've probably noticed, if you've been paying attention, that some covens are run by a high priest and or high priestess, and some covens aren't. For example, my own coven is run by a magister and mistress, and there's a very good reason for that, and it goes back to the basics of what I was discussing several weeks ago about witchcraft being a practice and not a religion. Wicca has priests and priestesses because it is an earth-based religion, and so it is led by a priesthood. In fact, in Wicca, everybody is part of the priesthood. If you're studying, if you're an initiate, you are a member of the priesthood, priest or priestess, high priest, high priestess. Whereas traditional witchcraft, being a practice, is often run more along the lines of a craft guild, and craft guilds are always headed by a master crafter. And likewise, a crafting coven of cunning folk like us, we usually have a master crafter who is running it as well. Now, traditionally, crafting covens have been led by a magister, but in this day and age it's just as common to see a mistress, and in fact in our coven we have both, a magister and a mistress. I'm the loud, noisy one, and my wife and mistress, I can actually say in all truthfulness that my wife is my mistress, and she is the power behind the throne. She's quiet, but she's powerful, and I may be the boss, but I'm only the boss because she gave me permission to be. So that always works well. So you have to take into account, when we're talking about leadership, the nature of the leadership is going to be defined in large part by the nature of the group. And in a coven structure, it's going to be either a magister and or mistress, or it's going to be a priest and or priestess, depending on whether it is a religious or a practice-based group. Now, what exactly does a magister do? Because obviously the roles are going to be somewhat different from that of a priest and a priestess. And a lot of people would say that magisters ponce around being self-important and prognosticating and pomposifying and other strange words beginning with P. I'd like to think that's not true, although I have on occasion been called a pompous oaf myself, so maybe I'm fooling myself, who knows. But essentially the role of the magister is a bit like chairman of the board. You get to make the final decision on things. You are where the buck stops, but in many ways a magister leading a coven is first among equals rather than the person who is sort of, it's not a dictatorship, not even a benevolent dictatorship. It is a role of service, just as the old concept of kings before the Christian church decided to mess it up was one of service, to serve the land. The role of magister is a role of service to the coven, and the magister serves at the pleasure of the coven. And if they don't like the way the magister runs a coven, or the mistress runs a coven, then they can be replaced. No coven is by any stretch of the imagination going to be a democracy, but there is a certain amount of democratic process that does go on, and in that usually the person picked to be magister, and I'm not saying this just because I am one, is the person who's considered to be the most experienced, or the person who has the most to offer. Once again, the nature of the specific coven will often dictate the particular qualities that one would want in the leader. For example, a training coven, the magister is going to be presumably a good teacher. A working coven, they're going to be a good crafter. They may not be as good at teaching, but they may be good at running and facilitating ritual. In an ideal world, there should be a good combination of both, but you can always fill up deficits. Someone who is a really good teacher can always make good use of the skills of the other initiates in the coven to fill any weaknesses, and that's certainly what I do. I try and palm off as much of my responsibilities on the others as I can get away with, but it usually involves catching them unawares, because if they get too much of a head start, I can't catch them because they're faster than me. But we do try. Priest, on the other hand, is a very different role. There is a certain aspect of facilitator, teacher, and obviously a leadership role in ritual and so on and so forth. But there is also the pastoral aspect of priesthood. Priests, by definition, are people who tend to their flock, and that's a very Christian phrase to use, but it's a good thing. If you look at Jewish rabbis, Buddhist monks, and pretty much the clergy of any of the religions in the world, you're looking at somebody who tends to the needs of the community. A large part of their work, when they're not educating people in the religion or leading people in the service, in the rituals, is community work, bringing things to the sick and the needy, providing guidance and advice, counselling, even a certain, healing, that sort of thing, all comes under the remit of a priest, and is often actively excluded from the role of magister. One of the, especially in the modern day and age, traditional witchcraft covens, the one thing they try not to be is to be a what's the phrase I'm looking for? A self-help group. We try not to do the psychotherapy, group therapy sessions, and trying to solve everybody's problems, because we believe that a witch is responsible for their own life and should take care of things for themselves. Obviously that doesn't mean we're going to turn away somebody who comes running for help, but it means that we don't encourage people making a habit of turning to the coven for every little boo-boo that turns up in their lives, whereas a priest in a religion is going to be there to provide counselling and succour and sometimes food, clothing and a roof over your head, as the case may be. Not that we'd ever turn anyone away from our door who turned up in need, but we how to get themselves out of the mess whilst doing what we could to help. It's not our main focus isn't providing succour to the weary. It's helping them to get up off their arse and take care of it for themselves, I think is the best way of describing it. So the role of the priest is dealing with the community aspects, the rites of passage, dealing with the welfare of the congregation, and providing the religious instruction and the rites of passage and the daily or monthly or seasonal liturgy. That doesn't mean we don't do any of that, but we don't do it in any formal way. We have our celebrations, but the celebrations in traditional witchcraft tend to be more craftings than they are sort of, hey, it's summertime, hoo-hoo. It's more of it's summertime, now it's time to do this working. So it's much more practice oriented than celebration oriented, I think is the best way of describing it. And the important thing to remember is that all of this is predicated on the fact that to be a witch is to take responsibility for your life. As Robert Cochrane said, don't do what you desire, do what is necessary and be prepared to pay the coin. Every aspect of that is part of what being a witch is, and that is to live your life fully and without regret. Which means take responsibility, take life by the horns, and don't live in fear, ultimately. Whereas a lot of the mainstream religions, fear is a big part of the way that the clergy control things. Be good, obey the rules, or you will go to hell, is a pretty good fear incentive. For us, going to hell would involve being stuck with most of the Christians. No, I don't mean that. I know some lovely Christians. There are some less than lovely ones, just as there are in any belief or faith. I try very hard not to paint everyone with the same brush, but sometimes that's difficult. Even with pagans, sometimes you just want to bang their heads together. Especially with pagans. Pagans are an ornery lot, in case you hadn't noticed. Very opinionated. Whenever 3 or 4 witches are gathered together, there will be 5 or 6 differing opinions, and they will fight over it. It's the nature of the beast. When you have fiercely independent and individualistic people who are very passionate about what they do, then they are going to express themselves very passionately, and there are going to be arguments. Best thing about it, perhaps the best description of the role of the magister is to be an impartial referee. At least it can be like that at times. A lot of it is learning to actually not interfere too much, and that is one of the great secrets of leadership in any walk of life, I think, is learning not to overreact or to try too hard to solve problems, because a lot of things, if you wait, they resolve themselves. People get into a huge argument, sometimes if you just wait, as they calm down and cool off, they begin to see that they've gone too far and they start to self-correct. And that often involves a bit of backpedaling and a bit of revisionary history, but ultimately they sort it out. And you didn't have to do anything, you just had to stand there and look impressive to give them incentive to cool down. And it's kind of aloof, but it's actually very effective. And in politics too, it's a skill that seems to be lost in modern politics. But historically, a lot of the great leaders in history, one of their great skills was the ability to not reach for the sword or the hammer or the pen of execution, and to wait and see how it plays out. And I think generally in life that is a good piece of advice. See how things play out before you react to them. Never jump in the heat of the moment with any situation. Always give yourself a moment to see what's really going on, to see the big picture, and to be able to enter into it calmly. Because when we do things in the heat of the moment, we make silly mistakes. That's how we get things like the Patriot Act and McDonald's. Or I just had a McDonald's and I really regret it, remorse. But you know, that's the way it goes. So really the role of the leaders in a witchcraft coven, if we're talking the traditional witchcraft route, which is practice, not religion, you're looking at people who can facilitate things. They can gauge how people are doing and encourage them in the right ways and facilitate their growth, and basically be the final arbitration, because a lot of stuff in a traditional witchcraft coven works by consensus, but the magister gives a nod at the end to say, yep, this is it, this is how we're doing it. So hopefully that made some kind of sense. It's I've never really heard many people discuss it, what it actually means to be a priest or a magister and what the differences are. So I thought it would make an interesting discussion here, and hopefully it will spark some wider discussion out there, the other side of the camera. And if it does, I'll look forward to seeing what you have to say. So let's look at one of the practical aspects. So whether you're a priest or a magister, one of the important aspects of the role of leadership for witches is the role of facilitation. I often talk about how we're not really teachers, we're facilitators, but it goes further than that. For starters, one of the thing that defines a witch as a witch is what they do. It's the practice that they do. It's the rituals and the spells, the magic. It's the doing stuff. And the first role of leadership as a facilitator is to facilitate those rituals, those workings. And this is really what you see mostly when you look at a magister of a coven, is that they are facilitating the work. Now, some of that facilitation is done through delegation. Facilitating by delegating, and procrastinating not so good. Essentially, it's getting stuff done, and the way you get stuff done is by providing leadership in the rituals. Sometimes the magister and the mistress center the rituals, sometimes they encourage other people to center the rituals, but they always have an active hand in the workings, because certainly in the kind of tradition that I'm in, the structure, the bones of the tradition are tied up in the connection between the coveners and the land, the mythic landscape, the ancestors. And this is most obvious in the role of magister, because the magister is the king for a day, if you will, without any of the sort of pomp of bling connotations of that. It's about the magister is the connection to the land. The magister, as the person centering the ritual, is the fulcrum of the compass, and so it's the point of contact for all the levels. It's the center of the center, if you will. And so facilitating ritual is very important, because In our tradition, for example, and I know that the Roebuck clan people can do this as well, the Magister pays the coin for the ritual space, for the working. So, there's always literally a coin that is paid. The Magister usually hands it to the Guardian, who places it under the besom as he brings people into the ritual space, and then that coin is disposed of in various ways depending on the tradition you're talking about. We tend to collect the coins together for a while and then go and put them in a collection box, a charity box somewhere. We will occasionally, when it feels the most appropriate thing to do, we will leave them at the crossroads at midnight, which is great for any homeless person who comes by the next day and sees a couple of dollars worth of quarters sitting there and is able to go and buy one of those McDonald's that I maligned so much earlier in this little conversation. The Magister of a crafting coven is going to be the most experienced crafter in the group, and so obviously they have more knowledge usually about the actual techniques, the actual rites, and so facilitating the rituals is a natural part of that experience, and encouraging other people to try stuff and providing guidance so that the other people become more experienced as well. It's not like some of the old school medieval craft guilds where everybody would guard their secrets and try not to share them. In fact, that's the reason the craft guilds were really set up, was to make sure that didn't happen, although sometimes it still did, because politics gets into everything. But the idea is both to provide leadership and experience and to facilitate the growth and the increase in experience of the other initiates. Because one day, Magister's got to retire and somebody else has got to step in. And whenever I mention that in my coven, that's usually the point where people start saying, "Oh, is that the time? I must dash." But I'll catch them out one day. Teaching is for me one of the most important and enjoyable aspects of being a Magister, because the method that is used to teach in a trad coven isn't the kind of teaching you get in school, for example. Teaching in school is often done by rote. You learn facts, you learn lists, you learn dates, you learn tables of correspondences, and in some witchcraft covens a lot of that happens as well. People learn colour correspondences and incenses and stuff like that, and they get given a lot of lists. I'm not really very fond of that way of learning, because what you end up with then is a set of facts that have been handed to you, and you basically take it on the authority of the person who gave it to you that it's right, and you work with it, and that's it, end of story. Now, it's great if you're studying for an exam. Lists of facts and figures, dates and techniques are great for passing tests, but they're not so great for devising your own ways of doing things. And one of the things that's very important to traditional witchcraft is that that you don't go to a recipe book and follow the instructions to do anything. Basically, you learn the underlying principles, and every time you do it, you tailor the crafting to the time and the place and the need, so that you don't get caught out if you're out of an important ingredient in the recipe, because you know enough to be able to say, okay, well, I haven't got this, but I can use that instead. And it's one of the big differences, I think, between a good crafter and someone who is puttering around in the witchcraft realm, if you like, is that you take ownership of what you learn. And so I like to say that we don't actually teach. What we do is we facilitate learning, because the person who's actually teaching is the student, is teaching themselves. We are providing opportunities and experiences and sharing our own experiences in order to facilitate the learning process. And what happens then is, instead of inheriting a list of facts and figures, what you get is that you get to take ownership of things that you know because you've experienced them. And witchcraft is a very experiential thing. There's a lot of stuff that you can't just tell people about. They really have to experience it for themselves and take ownership of it in order for it to be of any worth to them. And so that's the kind of teaching we do. We facilitate through experiences and through sharing of knowledge, and through sometimes just throwing open the gates of hell and diving in head first, because it's kind of fun. One of the key things, I think, when it comes to learning is that a lot of what we do in this day and age is recovering lost lore. There is no such thing as an unbroken lineage, whatever anyone might tell you. Even groups that have been practicing for several generations, maybe since the 20s or the 30s, are still working with fragments, and they're gradually putting the pieces back together. My own coven and tradition are no different in that respect. We are working with bits and pieces that we've got from various sources, and we are looking to fill the gaps and synthesize a living, breathing tradition from it. And I think we're particularly successful at it, but then I'm kind of biased that way. But the important thing is that when you work this way, what you in effect are doing, awakening ancient memories. And it never ceases to amaze me that again and again and again from students I hear the same thing being said. It doesn't feel like I'm learning new stuff. It feels like I'm remembering stuff I forgot a long time ago. And this for me is really part of the magic of the learning process within a coven, is that you take ownership of it because you remember. You connect with your ancestral memories, and the information is there to be brought to the surface. And this is a really wonderful and very magical thing. And it's one of my favourite things about teaching is when I see the light go on in someone's eyes and they start teaching me. Because that's what it's all about. It's about sharing our experiences and learning together. And I think if you approach witchcraft in that way, you can't go far wrong. Because it becomes a voyage then, a voyage of discovery, an adventure, a safari, however you want to describe it. It becomes something more than just, oh God, I've got to finish the White Goddess by Tuesday. It's, it just makes it so much more worthwhile. And I think, if the journey is the thing, the destination is just a time to take a breath before you start the next journey, then this is the way to make the journeys memorable, is to really immerse yourself and experience it, live it, breathe it, and be it. And a good leader, whether the leader is a magister or a mistress, a priest or a priestess, a grand high mucky muck, or somebody who just got press ganged into starting a training group, when they're at their best is when they are sharing and learning right alongside you. And that's one of the reasons I enjoy teaching so much, is that every time I'm sitting here at the front of a class or at the head of a podcast, the words coming out of my mouth, half the time I'm going, oh wow, I never thought of that before, that's really cool. I learned something in the process too. Hopefully every now and then so do you. But I'm having a blast and I'm going to keep doing it. So join me next week when I'll be talking about something completely different. Thanks a lot.
By a bent line, by a straight line, by a crooked line. The Crooked Path, a podcast for modern cunning folk with Peter Pagan.